Okay, try number 47. So I'm gonna go ahead and say I may sound sick because my nose is stuffy and I kind of am. And this video is gonna be a couple of pages I wrote about the phenomenon with, how do I just break this down in a way where I can't get censored, but I get to the point. Oh yeah, ignore all noise from outside. If you hear anything, just ignore that. I guess I could say a video about Jezebelic quote-unquote black men and their phenomenon where they pretty much do what traumatized people commonly do. They use humor, oh my gosh, as a coping mechanism, but they also tend to use the behaviors of their Jezebelic moms or just Jezebelic quote-unquote black women that they're around in general as a stage act, and they get famous off of it. And yeah, I guess I could just use that as like a summary, because I know the first two tries I said turned out or alphabet quote-unquote black men, but honestly Jezebelic is just a better term because that's one of the main spirits that they have anyway. Well, I won't say one of the main, but that's the one that causes all the flamboyance. And even in people that aren't like necessarily turned out, at least to a certain extent, when they have the Jezebel, Leviathan, and other marine spirits, which also can sometimes cause narcissism, which really this is a form of narcissism to an extent, at least for certain people, because the thing with the pride stuff is that nobody can tell them anything, and it actually is pretty similar to just straight up narcissism to a certain extent. In certain people, though, not all of them, just certain ones. Because the Leviathan and Jezebel spirit is at different ranks in different people, in different traumatized people. But that's kind of a whole nother story that I wasn't really trying to go into. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah. I also want to say that this isn't one of those Willie Lynch syndrome programming videos. I'm not one of those people that's into the agenda of tearing down the family system and separating the man from the woman, whether they're quote-unquote black or anything else. Of course, I don't like any of those terms, but just so people know what I'm talking about, this isn't one of those Jezebelic Jezebelic house nigger, if I can even say that, screw quote-unquote black men videos. That's not what this is. I'm focusing on something that is really ignored but really prevalent, and this of course is going to revolve around the issue of SA and things like that. But let me go ahead and start because I don't even really think I have enough storage space. Okay, so I've been thinking about making a video on this for forever and a day, months on end, but I specifically wrote this down 9/23/24. I'm going to start off with a side note thing that's going to kind of be irrelevant, but it's just something that I noticed. People who've been molested tend to like Hello Kitty. That's just right there. Do with that what you will, but I've just been thinking about that. I decided I'd throw this in here. Okay, wait a minute. Didn't even finish because I had used a period instead of a comma. People who have been molested tend to like Hello Kitty. Or I could say or. Industry people who have spirits that initiate or activate marine spirits, perversion spirits, Jezebel spirits, spirit spouses, etc. that you can get from the spiritual transference that takes place during the demonic ritual of SA. all forms of child abuse or really abuse of people in general is a demonic ritual. And if I didn't write this anywhere else, a side thing is that, of course, fornication would be a demonic ritual. Sodomy, which is anal or oral sex, if I can even say that on here, that would also be a demonic ritual, obviously. Of course, for the same gender relations, but I mean, you should never do that with anybody. So sodomy is sodomy regardless. A lot of people try to leave that out and act like that's like gender based, but no, demonic ritual is a demonic ritual no matter who you do it with. In fact, it's really called thelema. Okay, what else was I gonna say? Oh yeah. So another thing, when you go through SA or really kind of any type of abuse from someone, spiritual transference will take place, but of course, definitely with anything sexual, whether it's consensual, quote unquote, or not. So like, you get the soul tie, their DNA goes into you, yours goes into them. That's how people can eventually end up with multiple personalities, or one way, because that's a process in the whole quote unquote schizophrenia and even DID. That's a spectrum, but I don't want to go into that because I don't think I have enough space for that anyway. So yeah, that happens. You get their personality traits. Wait a minute. Okay, I really didn't want to stop, but like, outside noise is really throwing me off and I couldn't even really focus. So, where was I? I guess I'll just keep going. So, transference that takes place. Oh yeah, I remember. So the transference. If they have, well, not if they have, definitely in the abuse situation, they would have perversion spirits and a whole bunch of other spirits. And those can transfer into you, just like how with generational iniquity and demonic epigenetics, like your parents' issues can pass down to you, but the spirit doesn't necessarily have to manifest in you the same way. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll become a chomo or anything like that. You could just end up being one of those people that are traumatized and run around saying that you're a furry, or one of the people that are into that stuff where they start handcuffing people and all that, which comes from trauma. And actually, that doesn't even really have to come from SA. I mean, getting quote-unquote whoopings, that can make somebody fall into all this weird stuff where they start wanting to handcuff people and beat people up. Because if you can't, wait a minute. To cope with something that hurts or makes someone feel bad, sometimes they'll convince themselves that it feels good, even on the subconscious level, and they don't even really do it purposely. And so then they'll want people to beat on them and a whole bunch of stuff like that. So yeah, that doesn't even have to really come from SA. That can just come from regular physical abuse. So I think that was all I had to say for that transference thing. Transference that takes place during the demon. No, I already read that, didn't I? Yeah, I did. Okay. Some examples of industry people who reel in and initiate people with these SA/beta sex kitten programming spirits are all rappers pushing the feminine thug persona. And there's so much I could say about that. Like, if you know about how that specific group of Europeans that run around Africa pretending to be the people who run the music industry, the reason that they wanted people pushing the feminine thug persona to do the whole sagging thing is because that actually comes from buck breaking, which was a form of Virgo Vasal or DID ritual or sodomy form of trauma-based mind control. All those things are like the same thing. And during buck breaking, the slaves that were gonna get molested or whatever, they would have to sag. People say that it starts in prison. It actually didn't start in prison, but it happens there too because the same form of SA trauma-based mind control goes on in there. In fact, a lot of different types of trauma-based mind control goes on in prison because when you're in any part of the people cash cow systems like the cash for kids system or the adult branches, which sometimes have children in them too, like the adult prisons, and the military, you're considered a ward of the state, so they can use you for experiments. That's why prisoners have been used for experiments with LSD and all those other things. So have people in the military, so have foster kids. There were experiments done with foster kids by the Chomo occultists who made the mental health system, where they would put kids in homes with turned out Chomos and then write up papers on how traumatized and messed up the kids ended up in the end after all the essay. And of course, the Cash for Kids system, including the CPS branch, they do trafficking in and of itself, but that's another story. So, yeah, push the feminine thug persona, such as the baby. I know, like, he's not even really talked about anymore, but, like, he pushed that weird sexual stuff too. But I do notice that when the women do it, they're talked about more, but no one wants to talk about these guys who push all this weird sodomy, weird stuff that they talk about. R&B perversion pushers. Because R&B music, that was a whole bunch of weird stuff too that nobody wanted to talk about. And, they were literally singing about the child essay and stuff, like, that song where I don't even remember what it's called or any of that, but I do know that they start off with you may be young but you're ready. Songs like that. All of that R&B stuff was a whole bunch of weird perversion stuff that revolved around child essay and assaulting people. That's pretty much what all of it was, but nobody wanted to talk about it because, of course, people accept insanity in small amounts, and every generation normalizes something new and demonic. So, yeah, that's how things progress into getting worse. Anyway, Beyonce, in fact, there was this dude who was saying that Beyonce's music had turned him out. And of course, I'm using terms like this to try to get around censorship, so keep that in mind. Kevin Gates, and he went through all that SA trauma-based mind control stuff. They all do. Although I've never really heard anything about the baby story and him growing up, but I can only imagine. And then I put, especially people like, quote unquote, Sexy Red, Megan Thee Stallion, that Ice Spice Girl, Nicki Minaj, etc. Could have put Rihanna too. She was literally kidnapped from the island she lived on by record label people, and they took her through the SA trauma-based mind control the same night they were about to kidnap her. Cause I don't know if she really was in any type of bloodline. It just seemed like they found her on the island. She was in the military too, I think. And she was about 15. Her parents were abusive and on drugs, and so that's why they were able to kidnap her and for nobody to say anything about anything. And that's how these things go. The kids are so rejected and abandoned to where they're willing to sell out. Although I'm definitely not doing any victim blaming type stuff here. Because, she was literally kidnapped. And when things like that don't happen, usually their parents sell them out. Usually. But of course, there's situations like with XXXTentacion where he was kicked out and homeless at 17. And that's why he was able to be snatched up by the Lemic SA practicer that he was that brought him into his mansion and introduced him to thelema and recording essay imagery while he was still 17. All that stuff that he was brought into. So, yeah, people get in different ways. Some are born in, some are just sold out by their parents, stuff like that. That's how the industry goes. Trying to figure out where I am. You may notice people who fall into promiscuity due to SA always like these people, especially if they're Hebrew or in certain melanated groups, because music appeals to certain spirits and certain groups of people who are under certain forms of trauma-based mind control. That's why a quote-unquote black person may like some song, but then a quote-unquote white person may say, I don't understand why anybody would ever listen to this. This sounds terrifying. Like that song Timmy Turner. Really plenty of songs that I could name. So, yeah, that's how this music stuff works. It's made to appeal to certain people. Not to mention that certain types of social conditioning, well, no, not even certain types. Social conditioning is only pushed towards the people it's really aimed at. So, like, a lot of this music doesn't even come on the radio in certain areas. So it really depends on what side of redlining you're on. So much I can say about that. Just like with the food, in the redlined areas, the food is worse. It's not good for anybody, but it's worse. Where was I? Okay, I had to burp for like 5 minutes. SA can either give you a marine spirit, or you can be born with these marine spirits through generational curses and spiritual epigenetics through generational iniquity. If you were born with the spirit spouse / marine spirits, they can set you up to be SA multiple times, even into adulthood. And I know people that don't understand this and have the spirit of offense and get offended easily and things like that will flip out because of that, because they feel like this truth is some form of victim blaming when it's really not. But I mean, this stuff is for whoever understands. If you know, you know. That's what I hope these videos will get to, because honestly, I don't even want to have to deal with people coming and reporting stuff. Like, every time I make a channel, I always get banned before I even get any views. And I really think this is good info for the people who really have been trying to, like, figure these things out. They can make people with perversion spirits just so happen to come around. They being the marine spirits or spirit spouse. So, like, let's say, what example could I give? So you're like, I don't know, I'll just think of something more simple. You're at school and you have a marine spirit, and then these spirits work in the spirit realm to, like, attract some teacher to you that also has marine spirits and other perversion spirits. And then that teacher ends up assaulting you in some way, harassing you, and that's some trauma for you to mess you up and keep you from reaching your destiny. That's a small summary of how this can go. And it usually tends to be something even worse than that for a lot of people. But that's one example. Side note, somewhat, Georgia and Cali both have spirits of perversion over them as, like, one of the principalities. Most people I met, male or female of all ages, have been SA'd. And I'm talking about most people I met in GA and Cali. So everybody had been SA'd pretty much. Most people I met for years as a kid, some even into adulthood. This is also why everyone is turned down. You know, in GA and Cali, they claim that they're the alphabet hotspot, but this is why. And okay, some people get perversion, lust, and marine spirits just from falling into I don't know if I can say this on here, but I'll just say how can I say it? I usually call it people abuse material, because when it comes to the internet videos that people fall into a lot these days that screw people up, really everybody's a victim in the situation, except sometimes like the people running the film company or whatever you would call it. But I mean, a lot of them are even recruited in after being kidnapped and traumatized. So I'm going to call it people abuse material. Some people call it adult content, but I hate that term too. There's things that you should just never do. And that's why I don't like the term grown, because the term grown and the connotations it's used in, which is usually used towards traumatized girls who are acting out with promiscuity. But anyway, it's always used to make people feel like doing bad things when you're young is not good, but do drugs and slowly kill yourself when you're older. I just never liked that. So, yeah, anywho. People abuse material, the music, and being brainwashed at school. This is where people who aren't getting it from like SA and trauma are getting the perversion, lust, etc. spirits, other than it just being a principality over the nation in general. Some people get more demonized from falling into people abuse material after SA or emotional neglect. The quickest way to demon possession is through people abuse material and masturbation. This also leads to demons of sleep paralysis, insomnia, same gender attraction, and can't say that word on here without being banned for hate speech. Probably can't even read my handwriting or see this, but I call it chomoism. I call it a couple different things. And this is for whether all this starts in adulthood or childhood. Because contrary to what people think, what are people calling it? I'll just say chomoism. Chomoism doesn't start in adulthood, it actually starts in childhood, but it's ignored by the commonly dysfunctional relatives around the kid. And of course, the mental health system, they don't treat anybody anyway. So much I could say about this, so much. So there wouldn't really be any help for this kid other than like deliverance, or maybe somebody talking to them about like how them acting out from trauma isn't okay before things get bad. But yeah, still, it doesn't actually start in adulthood. And there's that. In fact, with the way that people are really trying to use the definition of the P word that I just called chomoism, what people really say is that it's when someone is attracted to people who are prepubescent. But as you may know, I don't really know about boys, but at least the girls, they start puberty at 8. So what the chomo occultist mental health professionals who make the criteria for this stuff are really trying to say with this specific P word that I call chomoism is that as long as somebody is attracted to someone who's 8 plus, then they're not a chomo, supposedly. Because it's when someone's attracted to people who are prepubescent. So you could like a 9-year-old, you could like a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, but anything other than that, then it's an issue. And that's bullcrap. And people are always trying to throw up the whole, once someone's 18, it's whatever thing. Laws and morals have nothing to do with each other, and 18 is not grown. But anywho, honestly, I mean, even people in their 30s and 40s are still getting played and used by people who are way older than them. So it kind of seems like people should just date people that are in their age range within like 3 years younger, 3 years older, depending on like how old they are, because that could depend too. But yeah. Trauma causes brain damage and holes in the soul / fractures / voids people fill with drugs, quote-unquote relationships, money, etc. And then I also put God-sized voids that are open windows to demons. Windows are ways that demons get in that aren't necessarily intentional or purposeful or even your fault. Doors are your fault or intentional or whatever. Not to mention, the abuse victim is an altar and a door in the abuse ritual, such as in the Bride of Satan SA ritual, where somebody goes through a whole bunch of SA and a whole bunch of stuff like that, different rituals, and it's called Becoming the Bride of Satan, a lot of stuff with that. But yeah, so the abuse victim, especially when the person or the abuser is actually in the occult and really knows that what they're doing is a demonic ritual, they